Anyway, so yeah, that is the little Euphorbia hypergaea. Some of the other smaller ones. This one on the right-hand side here is my pointer gone now again. There we go. The one down here on the right-hand side, when we started with the study, was only known from 3 localities. It's grown a lot since then. We found it all over the show eventually. Euphorbia clavicola from near Polokwane. Yeah, some interesting plants. Great fun looking for them. They can be nice and friendly. They can be very shy. Might not see them so well, but there's Euphorbia, the purplish in the background. That's Euphorbia. There it's hidden between the grasses, so they really hide away. Great fun trying to look for them. You really struggle sometimes. They can be extremely mean looking, as thorny things again. Next time you get closer to one of these Euphorbia verosas, these nice big ones, the thorny ones, there's some in the garden here as well. So imagine trying to hug it. Yeah, they're scary, these things, man. They can really hurt you. And then, of course, there are these that are not euphorbias that often very much look like euphorbias or get mistaken to be euphorbias. I think you're all familiar with the hoodia, which is fairly common in Namibia. The cacti from South America and Central America, and that people grow in their gardens, which they really shouldn't be doing. Synesia, or the Kleinea with a new name, and the stapeliads. There's some stapeliads growing up here. If you ever see it flowering again, have a good smell of the flower. Carrion flowers, they sting just like carrion in order to attract flies to do the pollinating. Fascinating stuff. And the sarcostemas at the bottom are quite common as well. Now, what makes something a euphorbia? They all have the same inflorescence, and it's quite a unique structure. That's why they are called. That's why they form. Well, that's why you have the genus Euphorbia. On the left-hand side here, you have a typical flower with the raceme. You have the petals and all the inside goodies, the male and female parts. The Cyathium is a little bit different. Cyathium has got male parts and female parts separately, and they then combine into this flower. I'll give a better diagram soon. And that is unique to the genus Euphorbia. You can see male flowers and female flowers separately, not together in one flower. More diagrammatically, a bit better, perhaps. Yeah, again, there we go. You can see this is a male flower typically. There's a stamen, the pedicel. Then you have the female flower with the styles and the ovary, also in the pedicel. And then they combine to form this Cyathium. Sometimes they're still separate on the plant, and you've got male plants and female plants, but most often they are together like that. So there we are, Botany 101. Although the general structure of the Cyathium is the same, each species has its own unique appearance and composition. And I'm going to show you now a series of photographs that are almost taken with a macro lens, because generally the Cyathiae are relatively small on the plant. And so these are all taken with macro lens of different species of Euphorbias. Some are closely related, like the one on the left-hand side, bottom here. This is Euphorbia mauritanica. That's Euphorbia stolonifera. You can see the similarity, but yet there's subtle differences between the flowers as well. Very typical for Southern African Cyathiae flowers are these kind of structures. But again, each one of them will have its own unique little nuances. You can see the pretty flowers, how pretty they can actually be as well. These ones here, those are just totally almost favorites. Euphorbia globosa and that group. They are really spectacular when you see them, you blow them up nicely. And it's like something from outer space, these little things that look like suction cups and all kinds of things on it. Very pretty indeed. And typically the capsules, the fruits are capsular, So it always divided these euphorbias in Southern Africa into 3 chambers. And you can see this is a very ambitious capsule. It is planning to take over the world. And some euphorbias are actually doing that. I can show you some that are growing in the pathways here, but higher up, that actually come from South America. And they are all over the show. Right, so, okay, at this stage, it's a reminder that this far into a show, invariably doesn't matter what TV you're watching, except maybe Netflix, you get a commercial break. And it's now time for the commercial break. Just want to make you aware of our book that we've written on euphorbias of succulent euphorbias of Southern Africa, field guide, by Alma and myself. It's available in the stores here in Namibia as well, except exclusive for some other reason. If you want to look what it looks like, there's one on the rack there. Typically, it contains a description of the plant. This is not easy to handle. Description of the plant, the spine shield and the spines, if relevant, the fluorescence, then similar species to assist you to differentiate between them, the habitat, more or less their distribution with a map, with the conservation status, who they're named after or what they're named after, some of the common names, as well as some notes on particular matters that will be useful for identifying them in the field. And for the first time in a South African field guide, plant field guide, also some descriptions on the photographs themselves, mentioning pertinent things to look out for when you try and identify them. The birders will be very well familiar with those kind of things, not so, Steph?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so what's all about this bit taxonomy stuff? In zoology, the taxonomy is fairly well defined for most species, and you're really starting to look at finer nuances, trying to find additional changes. In plants, it's a bit less well defined. Plants are a bit more complex than just in the mammals. At the center of the taxonomy is a species concept, which enables a classification of organisms, which at the same time, particularly in the plant world, also raises a bit of a problem because people tend to see species as boxes in a square. This is species A, it fits into this box. This is species B, fits into the next box. Plants, it's not always quite like that. There are these nuances and gradients between plants that become sometimes very difficult to decide, are they separate species or are they the same? And it's always something to keep in mind when you do your ecological studies, that nature doesn't come in boxes, not at all. It comes as a continuum. And it determines our understanding of biodiversity, like we all know that. It lays the foundation for ecology. I don't think I'm giving any secrets there. So let's get to the story of the day. Euphorbia spartaria. Euphorbia spartaria is a bush that looks like that. Many Namibians living in central Namibia would recognize it immediately. This photo was taken a few kilometers to the west of Windhoek on the Kupferberg Road. It's this structure that you see there. Those are some of the flowers, and they're quite distinct actually, once you get to know them. And that's the capsule that goes with it. It's in the subgenus Camissaceae. Euphorbia, the genus Euphorbia has got 4 very clearly defined subgenera that come out beautifully in the phylogenetics. That's one is in Camissaceae, and it's in one of the sections called Articulofructosaceae. Don't try and say that after a few beers. Right, so here is the Euphorbia spartaria was first described by a chap called N.E. Brown, who was a taxonomist in Kew. And in 1911, he described Euphorbia spartaria. Now, we must immediately take note of the fact that Brown himself never traveled in Southern Africa. He just lived at Kew, and he got material that came in from all over Southern Africa, particularly, but also Central Africa, and his job was to describe them. So he got these pressed samples that came in, but he never went out into the field. And sometimes that can be a disadvantage because you miss some of the nuances, particularly with the succulents. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And in 1911, from cuttings from the farm Hofnum, just outside Windhoek, just east of Windhoek on the way to the airport, we then got our first locality. I'm not going to go into the taxonomic detail, and that will bore you to tears. I'll try and move past that. So you can see there's our locality, close to Windhoek, and that's where the first type locality for Euphorbia spartaria is. It grows around the Windhoek area, maybe as far as Rehoboth, a little bit north as well. So it's this area in the Thomas Hoogland where you find it, say commonly, but you find it fairly easily. Right, then for some other reason, the same guy, Brown, in 1915, went and described Euphorbia spartaria again, under the same name. This time in Flora capensis, and he used collections from the hills near Steinkop, from the northwestern Cape, near Kasteelpoort, Klipkalk, and Zuidrivier. So you had these collections from these 4 different areas, and he bundled them all together and described Euphorbia spartaria again, for reasons only he himself would know. Now, if you go and travel in those areas and you look at the plants that grow there, and the plants that grow there, and compare them to the ones that grow in the West, it's quite obvious they're not the same thing. Yet he took them, obviously didn't have enough material to distinguish that, took them and lumped them and made it the same species. Can you already see the problem arising here? Going into the future, which one do you use to give it the real name? So, like things happen in taxonomy, not very quickly. It took until 1941 before there was a revision of all of this, when chaps called White, Dyer, and Sloan, White and Sloan to Americans, and Dyer was the curator of the herbarium in Pretoria, got together and they did a book on the succulent Euphorbia of Southern Africa, which incidentally is what Alma and I used to start off with to lay the basis for our field guide, because that was the only book that had been written that we could use. There was nothing between 1941 and when we started with our work. We had to go and collect all the different articles and bring all that work together. Anyway, in 1941, they said, no, let's they just said, okay, Euphorbia spartaria occurs at all 5 places. The material comes from collections from Van Reinsdorp through the north to the Mapuland and several stations in the neighborhood of Windhoek is what they wrote. Now, they clearly didn't go to the trouble to go back to the original literature with this. They just took what was already in Annie Brown and just carried on from there. So this is the way things remained from 1941 until 2012. Like I say, things happened really, really fast in taxonomy. When a chap called Peter Bruins from South Africa wrote an article, published an article on the nomenclature and typification of Southern African species of Euphorbia. And he said, right, now Euphorbia spartaria is not only those that we already have, but according to him and going through all the various herbarium specimens that he looked at, it also includes Euphorbia racemosa, Euphorbia indicoria, Euphorbia rhombifolia var laxa, Euphorbia rhombifolia var triceps, Euphorbia subdila, and Euphorbia rectiroma. They're actually all spartaria as well. Now, where does that leave us? Well, Euphorbia racemosa comes from Hammerkale, near the Beaufort West area. Euphorbia indicoria comes from Dubbelnoris and Hoomsdrift, the Orange River, near Goodhouse. Euphorbia laxa comes from the Chichava River Valley between Komga and the Kei River, way out in the Eastern Cape. Triceps grows on the hills near Queenstown, Subdila on the hills near Shakalskoupa in Namibia, and Rectirama and Klipfontein, Griqualand West. So in 2012, what did the picture look like? Euphorbia spartaria in 1911 started off as this colony of described species, well-defined species around Windhoek. And by 2012, they've migrated and have taken over the better half of southern Africa, all claiming to be the same plant. Again, the moment you go traveling around, you come across them, you see they're not the same. Here the pictures taken at more or less the type localities. Euphorbia spartaria, Euphorbia indicora, or decusata as it is known there, Euphorbia subdela, and Euphorbia rombifolia. Now, you don't have to be a most brilliant taxonomist around to see that there are differences between these plants. So how can it happen? Well, people go around, they collect the plants, and they press them, and they dry them, and they stick them into herbarium. But by the time you've pressed it and dried it, you've destroyed quite a number of the more subtle nuances of what the plant looks like. You fresh living daylights out of it and make it nice and flat, so the 3 dimensions are gone. Then it dries out and the colors are gone, and the flowers are squashed. And you can very easily make mistakes. That's why field work is very important as well. Okay, so we did correct this in the article in 2019 or wherever it was, and Euphorbia spartaria is back to being a Namibian endemic. But the moral of the story is you have to be really very careful and follow the rules and do what you can, because otherwise, what's the potential impact? Well, you don't really understand the ecological system very well, do you? If you call a lion and a mountain lion and snow leopard the same thing, then your understanding of the ecology goes awry. It's also important because we protect biodiversity these days on scarceness. It becomes very important. So if you've got this plant growing all over, or apparently growing all over southern Africa, vis-a-vis small areas, the protection status changes completely. And then also you have the Nagoya Protocol on terms of national genetic resources, which now suddenly you have this plant that originally is an endemic in Namibia, has become by some obscure means crossing the borders into 2 countries. Who now owns the genetic material? Protocol. So in conclusion, don't assume, think. Make sure that you really know what you're writing about when you write something. Be careful before you lump species. And very important, read the original literature. And that goes for any science, really. Doesn't matter what you do. Go back to the original literature, because there are huge amounts of mistakes that creep through. I've certainly come across misquotations often, where the wrong authors are cited, or they cited for the wrong papers and those things. So beware of that. Okay, thanks. The support. This is just a small part, obviously, of the work, but through the years, we were supported by a number of institutions: SANBI in South Africa, University of Michigan, the National Science Foundation, University of Limpopo, Go Green Namibia, University of Science and Technology in Namibia, and as well as the EU, the Siona project. And to remember, happiness is a state of euphorbia, in case you ever wondered. And right, that's the end of the road. Thank you. This was taken in the Skeleton Coast. It's lovely driving along and road gone. Spectacular. If you ever get the chance, you must go there. Right, then that's it. Thank you. Short and sweet, and hope you enjoyed it.